Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be talking about a legal thriller called Truth Be Told by Kia Abdullah. This tagline is one night, two stories. It's his word against his. This is a legal thriller that talks about male rape, which I think is really important and does very well, and even further more intersectional than you might even expect, which was incredible to read. I first heard about this book, by the way, at another booktube channel called LochanReads. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'll link it below regardless, and you should definitely check out her videos. She spotlights a lot of books kind of like this, a little bit on the margins from marginalized creators and otherwise, and she talks very thoughtfully and does really great analysis on all of these books, so I highly recommend her channel. This story is about a 17-year-old underage kid named Cameron. He was Muslim. He's a bit of a rising star, as pretty much everybody is at this Hampton school. It's prestigious. It's a launching pad to go into the Ivy Leagues, essentially. So he's doing pretty well for himself. He's on the come up. And one night, he and his brother Adam go to a fundraiser, which is basically a look the other way, letting down the hair of the boys, basically, where the school looks the other way and they can kind of drink and have fun and let loose, and it's not completely condoned, but it is what it is. He gets really inebriated. He goes back to his dorm room around 1 a.m. He forgets to lock the door, isn't fully possessed of his faculties yet because he's still processing the alcohol level. And from his perspective, Finn, a boy that he kind of knows in passing, enters his dorm room and rapes Cameron. From Finn's perspective, things are different. A different story ensues. And eventually what occurs is Cameron finds that he, for his own reasons, needs to report it days later, which hampers his evidence collection and hurts his overall story in court. Nevertheless, though, the case still goes to court because the state is trying to prove that they're like tough on this type of crime because it gets unreported so often. And so Cameron is kind of dragged through this process, as well as Finn. The story is exceptional in that the main characters are all very well fleshed out and from very different perspectives. The primary protagonist, I would say, is Zara, at least at the beginning, who is the legal aid counselor for Cameron. And she works at an establishment that has really fleshed out the process of advocating for victims of this kind of crime and setting up support networks and being able to communicate effectively with these types of people, knowing when to push, when to give them space, and treat them with dignity in a way that police officers generally do not. However, what was really interesting to me as a Canadian, this is set in the UK, I believe, and it feels like it's a lot more progressive there than it is here, in that Cameron's investigator, they're specifically able to request a police officer that is versed in this type of crime specifically and won't re-traumatize Cameron and put him through all of these horrific things that you could always read about with victims of this type, where they're gone into hyper-specific granular detail and every deviation from the story is used against them, etc., etc. The police officer does a really good job of advocating for Cameron, but still collecting the necessary story and evidence, etc., in order to proceed with the case to move on. And that was really great. Additionally, Zara is Muslim herself and has a complicated backstory that I think harkens back to the first book in this series. It's a duology, at least so far, and I haven't read that, but it sort of references what happened with the previous victim that she was advocating for, and I'm pretty sure it's the last book, but I'm not positive. And it also goes back to specific traumas that she has had that make this type of work really personal for her, and makes it clear that she's still sort of processing her own trauma. She goes to group meetings to process this kind of stuff as well, and is, on her own journey in dealing with that kind of stuff. So we have the A plot and B plot working in tandem, and Zara, as a Muslim woman, is able to understand Cameron in ways that other people who interact with him simply cannot. What it's like to have a Muslim father who's very overbearing, hypermasculine, and still kind of advocating for his son in a well-meaning way that is damaging to him personally, just in perpetuating hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity traits, and also the tension between him trying to get his son, who's brown, to realize that he's going to have a worse and harder time in the world due to racism, and so there's no easy answers anywhere in this story to look for at all. The perpetrator, Finn, is ostensibly, it feels very clear-cut and dry until we get into his perspective as well. He's also, of course, very privileged, going to this school. He's white, he's out as gay, more or less. He doesn't broadcast it to everybody, but he doesn't hide it either. And Cameron has some very problematic internalized homophobia that's passed down from his father, and it makes their interaction even more difficult for Cameron and for Finn. They can't have any kind of productive dialogue before the trial, and then once the court date is set, they're not allowed to have contact anyway, so they're sort of siloed in these really sad and terrible circumstances that only make it worse because the justice system just isn't where it's at for handling these types of crimes whatsoever. Finn, from his perspective, believes wholeheartedly that it wasn't rape and it was a consensual and loving experience for him. He thought Cameron was having enjoyment, but he does establish quite clearly through his interview that consent wasn't wholeheartedly gained from Cameron, and so technically it is rape regardless, but it still proceeds to court, and the story hinges on all of that kind of stuff. So we get a part one where the act actually happens and we sort of establish all of the characters and all of that kind of stuff. Part two is the trial, and then afterwards is what happens after the trial. This book handles a lot of landmine-like subject matter with a lot of compassion and a lot of intersectionality. A lot of times characters will interact with people of opposing viewpoints that vary from very extreme to like homophobic to Islamophobic to just like not dealing with internalized misogyny, and so reacting to Zara's case on her behalf with like a lot of indignity, basically, that she needs to educate them on, which takes a lot out of her. But it also elucidates why it's so difficult to bring these specific kinds of cases to court, because women have the internalized misogyny that perpetuates the system, as well as men like Cameron's dad and like a whole bunch of people in the country end up expressing around the case itself with the media attention, and how the victim mentality is very cleverly and I think even masterfully switched on its head when all of the notions that we use when a female victim is going to court, the same sort of questions that are bullshit that are posed to women are kind of the same but different. For instance, Cameron is a athlete. Why didn't he fight back? They can understand a woman not fighting back against a man because it would be, impossible, difficult, etc. But with Cameron, even though he's inebriated, they believe that for some reason he would still be able to fight back against it, even though he's, obviously scared, unsure of what is happening, in and out of consciousness, etc. It's a it's a wild accusation to hurl at a teenage boy who's still processing all of this stuff. Simultaneously, we get some really complex family dynamics from Cameron between his mother, his brother, who's a little bit younger, Adam, and the father. For instance, there's a really heartbreaking scene after this occurs, and Cameron doesn't tell his father, but the father learns about it, and the initial reaction from the father is to take Cameron hunting and to get him to kill something like a deer in order to process this thing that has happened to him. The father just can't make any sense of it whatsoever and continually projects his idea of masculinity onto Cameron in ways that are just so hurtful and honestly mind-boggling, but simultaneously, unfortunately, very believable. It's unfortunate that most fathers, I can imagine, acting exactly this way and trying to reclaim some agency for his son. He does it via his own methods, and his way of taking agency back is to kill something. It's really impactful and intense. The trial itself also is very good at being abbreviated enough that things clip along, but still communicates a lot of the very specific arguments that would probably be hurled at Cameron, and how things would be framed in order to best advocate for Finn getting out. Like, the best representation always makes it so that they target Cameron in ways that he doesn't expect. It's so unfortunate that you can be so outraged by something like that happening, but still believe that that's probably exactly what would happen. And this happens multiple times with lots of interactions with different characters. I think that the author has done a fantastic job with the subject matter, and I highly recommend the book. It's pretty short and sweet at about 350 pages, clips along nicely. It's commercial fiction formatted, so it's a page turner. The typography is even a little bit bigger. Initially, I don't typically go for commercial fiction, but I think stories like this would really benefit from commercial fiction publication. The wider mass appeal that it has to be read and internalized by other people, especially boys and men, would be really great, I think, at furthering this talk. There's statistics about male rape in the book too as well, so every time it sort of makes specific points that are systemic, it underlies them with specific data, which is great. It's all specific to the UK, but any kind of data in which I think someone is consuming a story that is going to make them confront notions about stuff that they have internalized from socialization, I think it's great when they have underlying data that is present in it, no matter where it's from. It just sort of gives the story a little bit more weight and gravitas that it normally wouldn't have, because they can dismiss it as in fiction, basically. Craft-wise, this is also pretty standout. It's got great flow. It condenses really complex dynamics into short interactions that are very clean and clear, which is really difficult to have in an excellent skill in this case. I would say it vacillates between just being like highly readable to a more sophisticated commercial fiction in which there's like really masterful sentence structures, sometimes really impactful dialogue, and some really great scene setting. Actually, there's some great descriptions that are really evocative with some active verbs. So it's kind of a bit tonally strange in that it seems like maybe some of the writing has been tramped down to be commercial fiction and to fit into this format and maybe the publisher's requirements in order for it to be published like this. It seems like the author has more chops than what is being put on display, basically, is what I think. I think, saturate the market with this stuff as far as I'm concerned. I'll definitely read more from this author, specifically the first book, in which it talks about the things mentioned here, I think. But other people have said that you don't need to read the first book in order to read this one, and I think that's completely true. It stood on its own for me. It might be more meaningful to connect with Zara as a character, though. So I'm going to check it out and see what happens. And there's some allusions to Zara getting future work in a sort of adjacent field. So I wonder if this is going to become a series and it's not just a duology. And if so, then I'll definitely check out further books in that. Anyway, I've rambled on about this enough. Please let me know if you've read this book and if you have any thoughts on any of her other works. If you'd recommend certain things like this, I'd definitely be interested in other books that target the same subject matter and does such a comprehensive job. I think it was really amazing and impactful and emotional. If you have any other thoughts or feelings, feel free to put them in the comments. We'll have a chat, and I will see you next video. Bye.